Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us for another in our series of online programs on topics related to the Holocaust. My name is Sandra Crane, and I am the Education Program Coordinator at the Georgia Commission on the Holocaust. The Commission is a secular, nonpartisan agency that strives to preserve the memory of the Holocaust and promote public understanding of the history. Today, we're going to look at how the Nazis took a significant interest in American race policies and how those policies inspired the notorious Nuremberg Laws of Nazi Germany. We'll examine the similarities in America in the 1920s and 1930s in Germany. The Nuremberg Laws became the legal framework for the systematic persecution of Jews in Germany. Not only did the laws lay the foundation for the next 10 years of racial policy, but sealed the fate for millions. The generic definition of citizenship is the status of a person recognized under the law of a sovereign state. A citizen carries recognition of civil, political, and social rights which are not afforded to non-citizens. Most scholars believe the concept of citizenship arose in the city-states of ancient Greece, particularly in Athens, and applied to property owners, but not to slaves, not to women, or poorer members of the community. A citizen in a Greek city-state was entitled to vote and subject to taxation and military service. Fast forward to 1790, when America's first naturalization law went into effect. It stated that free white persons could gain citizenship if they lived in the United States for 2 years and had good character. New citizens' children under the age of 21 were automatically citizens. The 14th Amendment, approved by Congress in 1866 under President Andrew Johnson, states that all persons born or naturalized are guaranteed equal protection of the laws, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of the law, or deny any person equal protection of the law. We find examples throughout American history how the 14th Amendment has been violated. Let's start with the Jim Crow laws, which were a collection of state and local statutes enacted in 1877. They lasted almost a century to the mid-1960s. They legalized racial segregation. The laws were named after a Black minstrel show character. They mandated segregation of public schools, public places, public transportation, restaurants, theaters, restrooms, and even drinking fountains between white and so-called colored people. One of the most egregious laws was denying African Americans the right to vote. Prisons, hospitals, and orphanages were also segregated in Atlanta. In Atlanta, the courts kept 2 Bibles, one for Black witnesses and one for whites. Injustices under the Jim Crow laws policies affected all aspects of American life. The laws were meant to marginalize African Americans and relegate this population to second-class citizens. Those who attempted to defy Jim Crow laws often faced arrest, fines, jail sentence, violence, and death. By 1914, every southern state and many northern cities had Jim Crow laws that discriminated against Black Americans. From 1933 to 1945, half of the Democratic members in Congress represented Jim Crow states. Another aspect of Jim Crow laws were the anti-miscegenation laws that banned the marriages of whites and non-white groups, primarily Blacks, and often included Native Americans and Asian Americans. This meant that interracial and sexual relationships were criminalized. In the 1920s and 1930s, there were 30 states out of 48 with anti-miscegenation laws. Only in 1967 did the Supreme Court issue its Loving versus Virginia decision, which struck down laws that banned interracial marriages as unconstitutional, thus violating the 14th Amendment. What else was happening in America during the 1920s and 1930s? Eugenics played an influential role in the US history and culture from late 19th century until World War II. Eugenics is a set of beliefs and practices that propose to improve the human race through selective breeding. The targets of eugenics were the poor, disabled, mentally ill, and immoral. Again, the Nazis looked to America. Women who were sterilized were disproportionately African American, Hispanic, or Native American. Doctors, scientists, reformers, and other professionals engaged in eugenic projects and actively promoted eugenic legislation. Eugenics was widely accepted in the US academic community, and the American eugenics movement received extensive funding from corporate foundations, including the Carnegie Institution and the Rockefeller Foundation. Public acceptance led to many state legislatures enacting marriage laws and compulsory sterilization bills using eugenics criteria. In the early 1930s, American eugenists welcomed Nazi ideas about racial purity and even republished the propaganda. This type of thinking impacted immigration laws. Due to a rise in immigration from Europe, arguments were made that immigrants would pollute the national gene pool if their numbers increased. In 1921, a temporary measure was passed to slow down the open door to immigration. The Johnson-Reed Immigration Act of 1924 was inspired by the eugenic belief in the racial superiority of old stock, which meant Americans as members of the Nordic race. People from Eastern and Southern Europe were considered inferior stock. Jews were especially considered to be genetically inferior. Chinese and Japanese immigrants were seen as the least desirable and were almost completely banned from entering the country. After the Spanish-American War, the United States created a legal form of second-class citizenship for people from the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico. Many other nations took their cue from the United States enactment of the Johnson-Reed Act and closed their doors to Jews fleeing persecution. These strict immigration quotas reduced Jewish immigration to a trickle. The Johnson-Reed Act remained in place until 1965. In Germany, Adolf Hitler was aware of the American immigration and race laws. In 1925, he wrote Mein Kampf, in which he outlined his racist ideology, identifying the Jews as a parasites and expressed the need for a race-based German state. Regarding the United States, he said, the racially pure and still unmixed German has risen to become the master of the American continent and will remain the master as long as he does not fall victim to racial pollution. As his power as a demagogue grew, Hitler spoke admiringly about American laws. He attributed America's status as a global power to its race laws. America, a superpower and respected civilized country, had laws that conformed to Hitler's Nazi ideology. Once Hitler was in firm control of the German government, everything changed. The German nationality law was amended to create a uniform Reich citizenship with Reich authorities having the power to grant or withdraw German nationality. In 1934, German lawyers gathered to discuss how best to create a racist regime. They were especially drawn to America's legal codes based on white supremacy. In 1935, 45 lawyers sailed to New York under the auspices of the Association of National German Jurists. It was a study trip. The purpose of the trip was to gain special insight into the workings of American legal and economic life. They were the advocates of the American model. The German lawyers attended a reception organized by the New York City Bar Association, where they were warmly welcomed. The racist Nazi state was already planned, but they used America's laws to legitimize their new order. The Nazis also admired America's conquest of the West. Hitler compared Nazi expansion to the East to America's expansion to the West. Hitler praised America for reducing millions of redskins to a few thousand and categorizing Native Americans as second-class citizens. Hitler called America the one state making progress towards the creation of the kind of order he wanted for Germany. Hitler expressed the view that America achieved the fundamental recognition of a race state. On September 15th, 1935, new laws were instituted in Germany that reflected Nazi racial ideology. The laws were named after the city of Nuremberg, the site of many massive rallies in the 1930s. The Nuremberg Laws helped take Hitler a step closer towards creating a homogeneous Aryan state. The first new Reich citizenship law created a category called state subjects to which Jews were assigned. It withdrew citizenship from the Jews, and Jews lost their right to vote. As stateless persons, that meant they could not get a valid passport to travel between countries or acquire a visa to leave Germany. Only those citizens of German blood or related kindred blood retained Reich citizenship. The second law was called the Law for the Protection of German Blood and Honor, institutionalizing the concept of the purity of German blood as the essential condition for existence of the German people. The Nazis believed that identity was biological, something carried in the blood, which of course has no scientific reality. There's no valid basis to define Jews as a race. The laws prohibited Jews from marrying or having sexual relations with persons of German or related blood. These relationships were labeled as race defilement. Many Germans reported suspicious couples in interracial relationships to the police. Many German Jews were integrated into German society. Unlike African Americans in the United States, they blended physically with the German population. Yet even a Jew with no religious beliefs, no affiliations or cultural ties was labeled a Jew. This impacted thousands of people who do not consider themselves as Jews. Anyone defined with 3 or 4 Jewish grandparents was defined as a Jew. Even people with Jewish grandparents who had converted to Christianity were also defined as Jews. These laws became the legal framework for the systematic persecution of Jews in Germany. But more significantly, they laid the foundation for future anti-Semitic measures. They legalized distinguishing between Germans and Jews. Jews faced persecution, not for what they believed, but for who their parents were by birth. Let's take a few moments and listen to survivor John Baer. John Baer was born in Frankfurt, Germany in 1928. After his father was released from Buchenwald due to his military heroism in World War I, he escaped with his father and mother in 1939 to America via England. Let's hear Mr. Bauer's experience with the Nuremberg Laws.
In 1935, the so-called Nuremberg Laws, N-U-R-M-B-E-R-G laws, were promulgated by Hitler. They officially made second or third class citizens out of the Jews. It prohibited the Jews from attending public schools, from any other activities in professional activities in Germany. It also, and that was the demoralization of what the Nazis thought would demoralize the Jews. It prohibited even the Jews from having a Christian maid at home. It prohibited any marriage between Christians and non-Jews and Jews, and said that the Jews no longer have the right to vote. They are just outcasts. As long as they are in Germany, they have German passports because obviously they must belong to nationality, but in every other respect, they were pariahs. In 1936, I remember one situation, an experience that was shattering. When I went to school, we had to attend a Nazi exhibit which wanted to illustrate the racial theory to everybody. And they had what they thought was typical picture there of the Aryan race, example of the Aryan race. There was Goethe, and there was a Mozart, and Beethoven, although Beethoven was, of course, of Slavic origin. And then they had a Jew, they said these are the inferior races. We Jews had to be there and listen to all that nonsense.
In summary, we can see how the ugly aspects of American history and social legacy provided a blueprint for Nazi Germany. Nazis believed in the Bolshevik conception of state, which demanded Aryan supremacy and racial purity. We can see how many American factors contributed to the foundation and the groundwork for the Nazi racial state. As we mentioned, they were the immigration laws, the Jim Crow laws, the eugenics movement, xenophobia, and of course the Depression. So scholars and historians have found sufficient evidence that the Third Reich has found validation for race-based initiatives in American law. The Georgia Commission on the Holocaust promotes public understanding of the history of the Holocaust. We work to speak out against hatred, prejudice, and anti-Semitism. Democracy is fragile and needs active protection. We need to protect our democracy. As citizens in a democracy, we have the obligation to reflect on the roles and responsibilities of individuals, groups, and nations when confronting the abuse of power, civil and human rights violations, and genocidal acts. As we look back at history and at our current examples, we better understand the importance of citizenship from persecution to freedom. So thank you for joining us today. And if you have any other questions, please contact me or any members of our team. And we wish everybody safe and continued good health. Thank you.